Lewis Carroll is probably the best example. People who analyze Alice in Wonderland now, they love to say this and that about its real sources, where its kind of wonderful weirdness comes from. But I'm absolutely sympathetic to the theory that he was to some extent portraying the experiences of migraine.
Welcome to Migraine Again, helping you eat, breathe, survive, thrive, and engage better despite migraine. If you or someone you know struggles with migraine often, join us for today's insightful conversation. Now here's your host, founder and managing editor of MigraineAgain.com and co-host of the Migraine World Summit, Paula Dumas.
The day your doctor gave you a diagnosis of migraine, you probably had no idea that you'd be in some pretty amazing company, like the incomparable Elvis, artist Vincent van Gogh, and President Thomas Jefferson. Because it's a relatively common disease affecting 1 in 5 women and 1 in 10 men, it makes sense that so many famous people would have migraine. What's surprising, though, is that people like artist Georgia O'Keeffe, Wimbledon champion Serena Williams, and actor Hugh Jackman have been remarkably successful despite migraine. That should be encouraging to all of us. Today's guest cracked open the history books to study some of the most famous leaders, artists, and celebrities with migraine. You'll be inspired to hear how they juggled migraine and life in the spotlight when we return.
Support for Migraine Again and today's podcast is brought to you by SpeakYourMigraine.com. Developed by Amgen and Novartis, SpeakYourMigraine.com gives people with migraine a voice, combining facts and shared experiences to break stigmas and paint a clearer picture of migraine. You're listening to Migraine Again. For show notes and resources from this episode, check out our program page on MigraineAgain.com. And now, once again, here's your host, Paula Dumas.
Today's show is actually part 2 of our conversation with Andrew Levy, English professor, migraine warrior, and author of A Brain Wider Than the Sky. If you missed part 1, he talked about rewriting your migraine story. And today we're going to hear some fascinating stories of very public figures who have privately battled migraine. Andrew, welcome back to Migraine Again.
Thank you, Paula.
Now, Andrew, as part of your recovery work, you studied some famous leaders and artists throughout history who have migraine, including Darwin, Caesar, Freud, Nietzsche, and Thomas Jefferson. What characteristics about them really impressed you?
Well, it's always a dangerous thing to diagnose historical figures, of course, of any illness. We watch out for that. And in some cases, such as Caesar, we only have the spottiest of information to even make a guess about. But in other cases, these people were amazingly good at leaving behind descriptions of the headaches. Freud's initial research field was headaches. And it was actually his work researching his own migraines and treating his own migraines very badly, I might add, that led him to psychoanalysis. So that the movement from sort of trying to analyze one thing that the brain did, the actual pain condition, led him to understand the brain as being sort of at war with itself and having different levels. And so in many cases, much of what we owe in terms of 20th century and 21st century psychology comes from a strange little sort of switcheroo that Freud pulled after spending several years trying to stop his own headaches and interviewing people with migraines and other headache conditions and trying to figure out why the brain fought itself in this way. Because he, from the start, I think he tried to treat it physiologically in some fairly arcane ways that that people wouldn't today, including some cocaine and some some surgery on his sinuses, which was, if you read the details of it, you would just wince. And it didn't work, but it did look and feel like the research somehow was cathartic for him. And that when he found his subject, when he figured out and understood the ways that the brain fought the brain, his headaches lifted. And that for me is probably the single most inspiring example where I could actually point at someone and say that resolving his work life and figuring out what his vision of the world actually was a kind of self-treatment. Jefferson, I think, is a great example. I don't think Jefferson had migraines. If I had to diagnose, I'd probably guess in the direction of cluster headaches. But he had terrible headaches that went on for weeks at a time. And one of those headache phases was just before he wrote the Declaration of Independence. He had a terrible ambivalence about the American Revolution. He was one of those Americans for whom, loyalty to the crown or to the rebels completely tore him in two. And he withdrew from the Continental Congress, and he went back to Monticello, and he hid himself away from the whole thing. He couldn't face making a choice or a decision. Whereupon ensued several weeks of terrible headaches every day. His descriptions of them are powerful. And when they clarified, when they cleared up, he returned to Philadelphia and he wrote, probably the signal document of his career and one of the signal documents of American political experience. And so that's sort of a different, simpler way of describing how other people's migraines have become the stuff of all of our lives, and how, in many ways, a kind of a movement from feeling that your brain is completely jammed up with ideas, unjamming the ideas, sometimes releases the stress that is causing the migraines.
That's fascinating, unjamming the ideas, because a lot of people will say that they cannot turn their brain off. And a migraine, or I would argue a cluster attack, definitely does that. It turns you off. It forces you down.
That's right. It is. It's exactly like a forced shutdown, like of your computer. It's like your computer's not working, it's hanging, so you press the off button. It's whatever inside of you is pressing the off button. It's saying you're stopping, okay? Whatever it is you're doing, you're stopping. And, you're not going to stop, we'll make the pain worse. You're still not going to stop, we'll make the pain even worse. I found a lot of interesting. For me, the migraines always felt to me kind of overblown in that regard, though. I write late in the book that it's like a fire alarm in your house that goes off when you burn a little toast in the toaster oven. It's like your brain is signaling that there's something wrong, that something needs to be looked after or taken care of in your life somehow. But it's an extremely tender device that overreacts and blares way too loudly. It's not fair.
Did you learn anything from their experiences that helped your own rehabilitation?
Yeah, really, I did. There's a smaller story in the book about a guy I met who is right now he's a professor in Illinois who works with gangs in the Chicagoland area, and he said that there was an early time in his life in the early 20s, where he felt he wanted to make a political commitment to people who were disenfranchised, but that he couldn't do it, that his ideas were too radical and he couldn't kind of face up to them. And then at one point he was part of a protest and he ended up in jail. And when he came out of jail, he realized that whatever he had been afraid of, he shouldn't be afraid of. That for him, symbolically, what can be a sign more that society disapproves of what you're doing than jailing you? But that he did it, he went through it, and he realized that strengthened his commitment and clarified his career goals. And his headaches dissipated greatly after that. And so I think that, I don't want to suggest that it's a cure for migraines. I think that's completely wrong. But I do think that migraines can be a catalyst for unclogging your brain and examining the conflicts that exist within you about the things you're doing. And that afterwards you may actually experience a relief of stress, and in so doing would be less likely to do the things, the stressors, that in turn may create your migraines.
That's fascinating. I'm Paula Dumas, and when we come back, we're going to talk about a couple of famous people for whom migraines may have been a catalyst for an epic breakthrough.
Just a quick thanks to Amgen and Novartis, the makers of SpeakYourMigraine.com. Go to SpeakYourMigraine.com on your computer, tablet, or smartphone to take the Migraine Impact Assessment Test so you can understand how much of an impact migraine has on your life. This is Migraine Again, encouraging and empowering you in your battle against migraine because you deserve to feel better. You can hear this conversation again or share it with someone who might like to hear it by going to migraineagain.com. And now, once again, here's Paula.
And we're back with Andrew Levy on Migraine Again. One of the people who fascinates me is Thomas Jefferson. Now, when I read about his experience, it gave me a sense of relief. I felt like migraine was keeping me from doing the things that I felt like I was compelled to do. Yet, if he could write the Declaration of Independence after going through a migraine or cluster attack, prolonged attack, we shouldn't be so concerned about time and space.
No, I think that's right, and I think that and it's just a reminder that your life is long and the dialectic of it is complicated, and what I love about the Declaration of Independence, something Virginia Woolf said, who also had very serious headaches. She said that her brain after a headache passed felt like the beach after a wave had rolled over it and then receded, and that she had wonderful descriptions of post-migraine relief and clarity, and did some of her best work then. And the Declaration of Independence for me has post-migraine clarity. You can just almost feel it in the sort of the calm and confidence, elegance of the phrasing and the words, that this happened at one of those calm places after a storm inside someone's brain.
Makes perfect sense. So you looked at some famous artists and writers with migraine. What did you discover in your research about some of them? Elvis, Kipling, Lewis Carroll, I guess. Virginia Woolf you mentioned.
Yeah. Well, Lewis Carroll is probably the best example. People who analyze Alice in Wonderland now, they love to say this and that about its real sources, where its kind of wonderful weirdness comes from. But I'm absolutely sympathetic to the theory that he was to some extent portraying the experiences of migraine, or certainly neurological disruptions that were equivalent to it. I mean, I have some brief moments of what's called Alice in Wonderland syndrome, which is when, for my case, I suddenly feel super tall. And I almost feel like I'm looking down on things. For me, it's almost always triggered by bright sunlight and snow. So there's just a surfeit of light, and suddenly I'm looking down on the gutters in my house. It's the most amazing thing. And for me, it's usually migrainous. It's the kind of neurological disruption that will precede a migrainous event. But it's what happens to Alice. Right. And so I think that Carroll did a wonderful job describing neurological disruptions and making them seem just like surrealism. As far as artists are concerned, it's not that hard to look at a lot of 20th century art, especially once people could get out of a non-representational mode and see, or at least argue for representations of migrainous conditions or neurological disruptions that are, similar to or functions of migrainous conditions. And that's almost, shooting fish in a barrel. But there can be some surprising people like Georgia O'Keeffe, who actually was a little clearer about it. She's got a beautiful, beautiful painting of a skyscraper. She's known for her desert work, but this was a skyscraper. And she said that it was, her description of writing it made it clear that it just emerged out of a migraine. And you see this flash of light coming from behind the skyscraper, and just the kind of the scissoring between the darkness in certain parts of that painting and the bright light otherwise feels exactly, to me, like that moment where light is way too harsh for you.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I look forward to looking that up, and maybe we can add a link to that in the show notes. We've been featuring different artists every Sunday on Migraine Again for about the past year or so, and people just love seeing migraine represented through the lens of art. It's fascinating. It's also can be very therapeutic to attempt, even if you do, bad art. It's a good process for the brain for kind of calming down and focusing on something that is beautiful or meaningful or an expression of your own pain. When I look at Vincent van Gogh's art, it seems to be screaming with pain. What did you see?
I see something similar. I mean, I see some of those patterns of light and dark startle in the same way that it appears to me when I'm having a migraine or I'm about to. And for me, it's not even like, I mean, there's these there are migraine art contests now, as I'm sure you've noticed.
Yes.
And it's a wonderful idea. And I'll try to be politic that because I'm trying to compare Van Gogh, one of the great artists of all time, against a group of amateurs trying to win a contest now, but representing a migraine is such a completely indirect thing. But when you see it in a painting, you see it. It's like holy cow, that's what that feels like. And Van Gogh has those that's what it feels like. I think probably in his case, I would guess more tied to other kinds of illness as well. Sure. But it's absolutely there. It's there occasionally. I found in Picasso as well, and you can look around. I think it's, for me, it was more fun to kind of walk around the world with someone with migraines and see it other people, and feel almost a weird moment of kinship. And it always made me feel less lonely to see paintings like that just jump out at me, especially if they're standing in museums.
That is the power of art. It can embrace you and make you feel like you're not alone when you think that you're the only one struggling with this weird disorder.
Right, and I think it's all part of just a process of both recognition but also not feeling alone. I mean, I still think, and I think it's better than it used to be, but I still think fundamentally people, have a hard time talking about their migraines, and people have a hard time hearing about it from other people. And that remains, I wouldn't quite call it a stigma, because it's not a stigma situation, but I would describe it as a mildly ongoing dysfunctional situation as a society, where you just can't say, I got a migraine, and have people understand what you mean or what you're going through. Without it, and they might become super sympathetic and helpful, but that's not that great. Or they might just kind of think, you got a headache. I get headaches. I think still fundamentally people think that way. I think seeing art and reading these books made me feel less lonely, but I also found that writing this book made me feel more empowered.
I'll bet. Well, we feel more empowered too. Thank you, Andrew Levy, for writing your book, A Brain Wider Than the Sky, and for joining us on these past two programs.
Thank you for having me on the program, Paula.
You've just heard from a college professor, and when we come back, you'll hear our question of the day from a college student who is struggling to get through school despite migraine.
A quick thanks to our advertisers, Amgen and Novartis, who have developed the SpeakYourMigraine.com website, where you can read stories, gather tools, and resources to help change the migraine conversation. It's time to turn private pain into collective change at SpeakYourMigraine.com. This is Migraine Again, and it's time once again for listener questions with our host, Paula Dumas. And Paula, today's listener question comes from Gabrielle, who writes, I'm a college student trying to live on campus, keep up with my studies, and get through classes, but I feel like I am falling behind. Got any advice?
Oh, I do. I wish I had a do-over for my college days, actually. And this is really hard. It's just as hard as holding down a job with migraine. But the difference is you feel like you're the only one, and you're not the only one. Chances are, if you're a woman, it's probably 1 in 5 women are dealing with migraine while they're in college. And anytime you're in a stressful environment where there's oftentimes erratic sleep patterns that occur, maybe from staying up late or a little bit of drinking, a little bit of partying, those things are not your friend if you have migraine. And I'm sorry to tell you that because I know it kind of puts a cramp in your college style, but maybe it's there to protect you in some small way. All I can tell you is that you can get through college with migraine. You might not do it in 4 years if you're going to a 4-year school. It might take a little bit longer. And this is where you just have to keep your eye on the goal and don't let migraine keep you from achieving your goals. One of our columnists Olivia actually writes several articles about dealing with migraine and school. And she suggests, creating a support network among your friends and classmates. Tell them what you're dealing with. No one's going to fire you. You're going to be okay. And then be honest and open, especially with your roommate, about your migraine needs, which means if she or he are wearing perfume or cologne and that triggers you, you can't have that. If the noise bothers you, if the light bothers you, these are things that if your roommate doesn't respect it, you can request a roommate change. Scented candles can be bad. You just really have to be very clear about this is what I need in order to stay healthy, just like you wouldn't do anything that would put your roommate at risk for being unhealthy. And then know what your personal limits are. They're going to be different than other people's, and then respect them. So this comes into how many hours you're going to study, whether you're going to imbibe in alcohol or anything else during college. These are things that, or eat certain foods off the menu at the dining hall. These are all things that can put you at greater risk if you know what your triggers are. College is a busy time. It's a wonderful time. And, you deserve to get a degree just like everyone else. So if it impedes your ability to take a test or study, you may have to talk with your professor about it and get a note from your doctor so that your professor understands how serious it is. And they can work with you and give you the flexibility that you may need in order to succeed in class. And if there's a case where, you can't take a full course load, again, it may just take you longer to get through school, but you can do it. You could do it if you set your mind to it. And I hope that you have an amazing college experience and that migraine does not get in the way. And keep us posted on how it goes.
And Paula, we might also mention it might be worth a trip to the dean's office or perhaps to the campus health department to find out if any environmental accommodations, lighting, for example, might be available, because schools are often willing to do a lot more than the general public is even aware. And all it takes is you going and asking the right question.
They do. Oftentimes they can give you a special diet in the dining hall. They can allow you to wear glasses, migraine glasses, for example, in fluorescent lit classrooms. They can grant you extra time for studies or for tests. There is a student that we know who was attending Stanford University and had an acute case of hemiplegic migraine who got permission to bring her service dog on campus with her, who helped predict her attacks about 20 minutes before they actually occurred so she could get to a safe place. So the schools are very accommodating these days for people who have chronic health issues or disabilities. So don't be shy about asking.
Excellent. Thank you, Paula.
Thank you, Rich. And thank you for spending time with us today to learn more about migraine. I'm Paula Dumas, wishing you a pain-free day.
Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us. We hope that you feel encouraged and empowered in your battle against migraine, because you deserve better. If you want to suffer less and live more despite migraine, be sure to check out all the great resources on migraineagain.com. Follow us on your favorite social network and subscribe to our free newsletter and this program. If you enjoyed today's episode, tell a friend about it, and be sure and join us again next time on Migraine Again. You'll be glad you did.